So what I want to do tonight is examine some of the sources that are available to allow you to undertake this investigation into the history of your local area by using your house, or indeed that of your ancestors, to add colour to the story of who they were and where they lived, by analysing the social history that passed around that house, almost as though it was some sort of time machine made of bricks and mortar that have seen this social change going around in the street, the village, the town or the rural area. In many ways, the house will tell you a huge amount about your ancestors' lives and those of their neighbours. It may well, for example, show you why it was built and the social circumstances surrounding perhaps a change in industry, an industrialisation in an area which created the need for mass housing, the introduction of national events, for example, into a local area, the coming of the railways with railway cottages, and the wholesale change in the high street and the surrounding areas. Undertaking the history of your house or your ancestral house opens the door to all of these aspects of history and gives you a far deeper sense of who your ancestors were by seeing them in their natural habitat, by understanding how they'd have furnished their house, by the luxuries and the technology they'd have brought in over time. So it really gets you to the heart of the home and places your ancestors back into this natural setting. But the problem is, as with anything to do with what I would call personal heritage, it always seems much easier when you see other people doing it. Just like Who Do You Think You Are encourages us that to trace your family history, all you need is 1 hour and a bit of time online, old-style house detectives had a very similar impact, apart from the sense that it only took 30 minutes. Therefore, it must be twice as easy as family history. For those who don't remember the old House Detectives series, there were usually 3 presenters who would march up to a house, have a good look round, and by the end of the programme, apart from giving it a bit of a makeover, would have told you exactly when it was built and who lived there, and the history of the house and its relationship to the local area. And of course, many people then phoned in after the programme saying, "Oh great, how can we trace the history of our house?" And when I was working as a researcher, it was very embarrassing, being in record offices the day after the programme had gone out, with the archivists having to field these questions along the lines of, well, yes, you have to come in person. We don't have a file on the history of your house on the shelf waiting for you to have a look at. It does take more than 30 minutes. Dan Cruikshank will not be there to help you. This was the sort of idea that TV makes things simple, easy, accessible. On the flip side, though, it inspires people to go and look at a subject that perhaps they didn't think was possible. And I know from talking to family historians that many people have actually taken this sidestep into a different type of history that uses very similar resources, but just lifts the lid on a different aspect of the past. Now, why don't we put more practical advice into these programmes? Well, we tried that with a series called Hidden House History. Did anybody see that one? Anybody at all? Please. No? Okay. It was very well hidden. The problem with the show was that no one really watched it, as is the case here, so it wasn't repeated. And the reason why I don't think people watched it, or certainly weren't aware of it, was because the commentators and the programme makers didn't understand what we were trying to do, which was to put process at the heart of the show. Now, House Detectives paid lip service to the archive sequence, usually a speeded up montage of people going in through the front door of the record office and then appearing in the repository shelves, pulling the document they needed off at random and having a look at the right page, just like we all do whenever we come here or our county record office, rather than the index, the catalogue, the fruitless searching, the eureka moment, the hours, days, weeks spent actually researching something thoroughly. All of that, it's gone. With Hidden House History, we tried to reverse this and actually put a more realistic portrayal of house history. And that word realistic is something I'm going to come back to. Because it isn't just as simple as going into an archive and finding out about your house. You have to do a huge amount of preliminary research and place it in the local area. So the aim of this show was to take a twofold approach. Firstly, to look at the architecture, to look at the signature fingerprints, if you like, of the bricks and mortar and the design and layout of the house and the surviving internal fixtures and fittings, to show you how you could use this physical evidence to start to determine when it was built or when it was refurbished and how this would have evolved over time. And the presenter of that sequence was the wonderful Jonathan Foyle, who at the moment I believe is climbing Britain's best buildings in a harness and abseiling down the front of them, something there is no way you would ever get me doing. Not because it's demeaning, I think it's actually a fantastic way to look at buildings. I just don't like heights. So good luck, Jonathan, with that one. But his role was to take a more hands-on approach to walking you round a house that you would see. Not the sort of house detectives programmes that would be grade 2 listed buildings or eventually mansion houses, but the sort of house that you would see or that your ancestors may once have lived in. 1920s, 1930s properties, terraced Victorian houses, cottages, agricultural farmhouses, the sort of things that our ancestors would have actually dwelt in, real history. My job was to focus on the archives and to actually explain how you find out when it was built, who lived there, how it was altered. And we tried to get as much of that realistic research on screen as possible. That was partly because it was something we thought needed to be done. Also, there was the fact that we had no budgets and had to pretty much film the research as it was taking place in the search room, which is another great myth about TV. There are huge budgets. There usually are no such thing as large budgets anymore. So we would literally have about a day to do as much research as possible, so it was pretty much a mad scramble to get information out there. But that focused the mind. And in many ways we had to use some of the material in very innovative ways, particularly the visual materials such as maps. And one house in particular I think epitomised the programme, which was a fairly small terraced house in Walthamstow, East London. And we knew roughly its state of construction from the area, but we were told, as so many of these areas in London, that it was because the railways came that the houses were built to populate and provide housing and shelter for the new people coming into the area. The railways were the social driver to get people into the houses. Well, we looked at this and found a wonderful estate map from the 1820s, which showed the whole area was filled with grand, stately homes with large grounds, all of whom would have been populated by the rich and the Tory voting peers or people with money. And what we actually found on closer investigation was that in the 1850s, a lot of these properties were bought up by the National Freehold Society or the National Land Society. And these large estates were broken down into much smaller plots, but each one as freehold land carrying a minimum value of 40 shillings, the minimum amount you needed to be able to vote. And once the land had been broken down and the houses built, in came the Whig and Liberal voters, who of course elected Whig and Liberal MPs and kicked out the Tories. It was Victorian gerrymandering. And because they'd created a new middle class, they had to put railways in to bring them into London. The railways were a result of the houses, not the other way round. And it's that real attention to detail, that focus on local history, that is paramount when you start looking at the history of your house. And that was the way we did these programmes, by showing the estate maps, by looking at the early Ordnance Survey maps, looking at title deeds, looking at census returns and the sort of people who were there. That's how we constructed the argument. Unfortunately, the reviewers didn't understand this. And the programme was seen by one person in particular, a chap called Victor Lewis Smith, who was the reviewer for the London Evening Standard. Fine chap, I'm sure, but never seems to have a nice word to say about anyone or any programme that he watches. So with trepidation we read his review, and it started out quite positively. Just when I thought I'd seen every property show under the sun, along comes this Betjeman-inspired masterpiece. Not bad. Unfortunately, he continues, the two presenters are charisma deficient and enjoy being upstaged by the buildings and documents they're talking about. That was the point of the programme. And sadly, that is what colours a lot of TV programmes, the sense that you're not really interested in the process. You want to see presenters waving their arms about or looking at pretty documents in very short sections and getting inside the house. And in many ways, it gives this false expectation of what you can achieve with house history. Just like Who Do You Think You Are? We solve every problem every week. All of these house history programmes suggest that you can find a construction date, or you can find the first person who occupied the house, or you can find out who owned it through time.